All right, we are recording. This is day 2 of our official Jungian typology group on Facebook Meetup. And last night we talked about just general typing. We wanted to start off with something a little bit very casual and easy to talk about. Granted, it could turn into a debate in some ways, but not usually. Last night we talked about basic interaction styles, how to recognize them. Most people agree the easiest system with that is figuring out their interaction style first, because that's usually the most obvious. Temperaments can vary, and then we talked about specific types in some ways. We talked about ESFJs, we talked about ESFPs compared to ENFPs. Um, we discussed ENTJs versus INTJs. I think that's pretty much it. And the difference between ESFJs and ESTJs. Right. Just off the cuff, it's the ENTP style. Anyways, but today we're going to talk about what is not the type based off of, and it will be the main subject. And obviously, I've had conversations with, Carrie, not Carrie, but Abby, for instance, about stereotypes, and people are like, well, I feel really zen, I like animals, and I want to save the planet, so I'm an INFJ. And you hear this nonsense, and people are just like looking at MBTI memes, flipping through them, and like, oh, that's me in the picture, and so that's what I am. And to me, that's absolutely absurd and crazy. And now, granted, it was a little bit easier for me because I always tested ENTP, and then I met C.S. Joseph in person, and he confirmed it pretty right away as soon as I got into the science. And so I didn't really have that kind of confusion that many people go through, and I get that. And so what are people's thoughts on different things that you see that people apply to typing that shouldn't be applied to typing? I wish Vic was here because he actually was going to talk about this. This is where you have to talk.
Oh, well, I have something off topic. So, I tested like ENTP every time except for the time when I was homeless for a year. So then I tested INTJ, but I was focusing on me in a way that I hadn't before, where I was meditating every night, and I was reading a lot, and reading fiction. I mostly read nonfiction before that, and yeah. So then I tested as an INTJ when I did that. Actually, I was pretty darn sure of my type, and until that point, and then I took that, and then when I saw CSJ's videos, I saw that INTJ was like the shadow, and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then I joined the CSJ group, and then I started downing my type.
And then you called me up and started talking my ear off, and I was like, no, listen, you're not an INTP.
Actually, it was I was thinking, I was told I was an ESFP. That's what it was. I called you about that, and then I was like, well, but I don't think so. Like, none of it lines up with my personality that I can see, but I can't see myself, so maybe you can see myself, right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked for like 2 hours on the phone. I mean, you didn't even care that I was in the bathtub. It's like,
yeah. Well, I don't know why I would.
I was like, hello, and yes, I'll answer the phone in the bathtub. Anyways,
well, but you did warn me about it.
And yeah, I was like, I'm in the bath. What do you want?
I was like, why is this even a thing?
Location's meaningless to me. But yeah, you're right. And so you see that, and so people are saying, oh, well, you're in sales and you're good at sales, so you must be an SFP or an ENFP. When right. I have an ESTJ friend who's one of the top 5 car salesmen in the USA. He works for, I think, outside Colorado Springs for Range Rover now. They offered him a job from Atlanta. He used to work for BMWs, ESTJ. And so I mean, it's still that quadra, but sales is a skill. People can learn skills, and so that doesn't make your type. It's just like somebody can learn engineering, but that doesn't make them an INTP. You know, and just like I said, it's the whole point of being a human is when you deal with the different sides of your mind. We talked about ESFJs last night, and people were saying, well, why are ESFJs like this and like this? Well, ESFJs are double control background. You know, ESFJs are ISFP shadows and INTP aspiration. So especially when you find one later on in life, what do? They get involved in engineering. They get involved in journalism. They get involved in research. That doesn't make them not FE hero and fun living going and really nice people running around trying to help people and trying to drag you into their religion, for instance. That still exists, but they still have this other side. And um, Eugene's muted, but she was going to say something about this. Hey, Jennifer. Everyone's muted. I'm just going to talk this whole time.
All right. No, it's cool. I'll pick up the conversation.
I'm here.
This is like a Ruby meeting.
I got lost in what you guys were talking about.
Wait, are you saying
we don't distract you?
Huh? Well, Ruby meetings, you had like C.S. Joseph, and everyone just listened to him the whole time, and like.
Oh, okay. I was like, wait, am I allowed to interrupt CSJ on the Ruby meeting?
I did, but I don't ask questions. I don't ask permission. But he didn't seem to mind. I mean, ENTPs don't mind being interrupted, so that's something you should know. But it's like, yeah, I don't want to have this like where I'm in the middle and there's people on pillows around me listening to my Zen.
Okay, so sure, let me interrupt you there. What was I gonna say that you said? I got confused. You said I was gonna say something about something.
Last night you wanted to talk about what types aren't, and we were discussing sort of stereotypes at the very end. And you got.
Oh yeah. Well, I was hoping you guys would initiate that, and I would just teach. I would just, thought vampire.
Okay. No, most so. Yeah, when it comes to stereotyping things like that, the last thing you want to do is obviously type someone based on memes, and so we can cover up interaction styles you want. Since there's some new people here, to go over that, but outside of that, when I deal with people who are like, oh, I think this guy is an INFP because of this reason, or they think, oh, this guy's an ESTJ because of this reason. That's definitely something we want to get away from and use the typing grid itself, especially when it comes to. I don't want to regurgitate what we did yesterday though. So that's what I'm getting at. And so yesterday we talked about concrete types being more balanced people and being able to cover a lot of multitude of different things just because of how they develop in life. And so when you think about an SJ who develops their shadow by age 20, they already have interests, systematic, pragmatic, and affiliative already in their mindset. But meanwhile, NTs are just like, I'm only systematic and pragmatic. And, you kind of go on society. Right. What?
Sounds about right.
It sounds about right, yeah. You're like, you can't even function, and they're like, well, why can Albert Einstein do all this stuff but not tie his shoe? Because he's an NT. He's messed up. And so it's just like, and so that's just kind of how it works out in that case, especially when you see like the stereotypes, I think, especially on the concrete types, when you see like ESFPs and they show the club girls, like, let's draw attention to ourselves. And but meanwhile, you got people like Vic who read all the time, and he's an engineer. I had my first Christmas dinner with an ESFP who's also an engineer. And so, when it comes to types like that, really greatly involves them about what they read and what they subject themselves to. And so of somebody like that, you would, if you hang out at the club all the time and you only listen to club music, yeah, you're not going to develop cognitive thinking skills in that sense.
I agree with what you're saying because I kind of have had the opportunity to be on both sides of what you were describing. In a way, I kind of fit the ESFP stereotype at some point of my life, and then later on when I had my kid, it's like I had the opportunity to step out of that stereotypic lifestyle of ESFPs and be more into reading about parenting and teaching and psychology and stuff like that. I wanted to uses tools as a parent, now I'm kind of starting to learn to appreciate the stuff that ESFPs aren't usually seen as. So yeah,
Yeah, most
just give
definitely.
concrete.
And you also triggered my memory. Now I remember what we were having a conversation with last night was Carrie was bringing up the reason why she thought she was an INFJ, and she's clearly an ENTP after last night's watching that. And she thought she was an INFJ because she was considerate of activism. And so she's like, well, do ENTPs, are they activists? Well, most definitely they are, you know, because FE Child is very sensitive and things like that. But then I described how we would view activism in that sense where you enter into, like I was part of PETA and you realize it's a cult or religion and you get out, you know, and I was going to say something, but there's children watching. So, it's good for me. I've been censored for 35 years, so I need to stop cussing anyways. But, and so you would sit there and doubt who you are due to the fact that you have a stereotype of something else. And so that's not a way to look at it. And so whether or not you fit in with other ENTPs or not, or you think you do, the only reason you're anything is because you fit the interaction style and the temperament and you go down those lines. No ifs, ands, or buts. How you develop your cognitive functions is completely varying and does not matter from person to person. Everyone grew up differently. We have what happened? Callum was coming in. I don't know, 5 different countries here. You know, there's a lot of different upbringings, a lot of different things that definitely developed it. And so people, for instance, attacking me on YouTube saying, oh, you're not an ENTP because you're too TE, not knowing about my occupation being a teacher, not knowing about my upbringing as a witness and knocking on doors and preaching the Bible my entire life, meanwhile doing public speaking all the time. Like, well, you don't have SI in theory because you're not shy, you're not afraid to be on camera. And I'm like, what are these arguments? And so, it's just kind of crazy to me. And if we can continue on with that, we'll discuss also something that always happens I see in the group is the people saying, well, I'm afraid of being around people, or I'm afraid of saying this in the public forum because it gives me anxiety. This makes me an introvert. No, it doesn't. You know, and so it has nothing to do with that, because there are plenty of introverts who are very outgoing. My brother is an ISTP, does public speaking, loves to hang out with the bros, you know, is all about social activity and playing football, you know. If he wasn't a witness, he'd be jumping out of airplanes, no doubt. And like all of that outgoingness that is very prone to ISTPs, but they're still introverts. And he spends a huge amount of time recharging by himself, reading books, you know, things like that. And he's
I was using that as evidence against myself for why I probably am an introvert. Just because I've done extroverted things doesn't mean that I'm an extrovert, right? I mean, but here I am having this video conference, and this is why I did yesterday's video conference, because I knew that if I did one, then today's wouldn't matter. Like, it wouldn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
And just the same, like with public speaking, like on stage and that, or at a eulogy or whatever, not a problem for me after the first time that I public speak. Like the first time's a pain in the ass, but after that, I don't know, is ass an okay word? I can't remember. Yeah, no, I think that's fine. No, okay. Well, now I'm frozen. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and the reason why, like I was trying to get across to you when we were having our conversations on the phone, an extrovert is somebody who initiates. And so if you ever watch C.S. Joseph typing somebody, and he'll say, oh, he initiated a new point. He changed the subject. You know, responding types don't do that. It's very hard for them to do that if they do at all. But like you have
okay.
no problem doing
no,
that.
I see that. Okay, so you're saying that's the example of them bringing the extrovert function to the introvert parent function and then back to the extrovert function, which is basically the introvert function of the other type, right? That's all we're talking about?
No, I don't understand what you just said.
Oh, okay. So, basically you're saying, because extrovert type is basically moving stuff that's out here, in here, working with it, then moving it back here, out here, right? But introvert types are basically working with stuff that's in here, and they move out here to reference something that's out here, and then they move back in here to work on it some more, right? That's how an introvert works versus an extrovert.
Okay, if you're gonna make it that complicated, I suppose so. I never thought of it that way. Like I was just trying to say, like in a conversation, Miles, you can just initiate new topic points and you keep adding on to it, adding on to it. Starters are the most guilty of this, and they'll just keep bam, 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 and then eventually maybe come back to the main point. Maybe, usually the SI starter will do that. Sometimes ESFPs will not. Um, uh, if you look at the structure types, they'll initiate in a controlled manner, and so they pick their opportunities to do that. And so if a structure type interrupts and initiates a new point, there's a reason for it. Okay, because they're direct and they're control. So there's always about an outcome. Hey, I want to interject this new subject to bring this person to a conclusion. Meanwhile, the starter informative type is just talking. Not necessarily caring whether or not you come to this conclusion or not, because we're just having a conversation. And so if you look at structure type, they're always about they don't like meaningless conversations. Let's just say that much. And so some people will say, oh, for instance, ENTJs get across, people call them introverts all the time. Well, they're double background. And so they're INTP shadows, and they're also ISFP, the same as the ESFJ. They still have that same two sides. And so many times you'll see an ENTJ saying, oh, no, I'm an introvert. And no, you're not. You just don't mind spending time at home, painting, doing photography, playing music or whatever. But when they're out and about, they're just like, hey, Donald Trumping it up, and just like, look at me, I'm a star, and it just like, that's very easy for them to go do. And, like I dated an ENTJ, for instance, who ran charity galas, and just like had no problem organizing everything, and just like everything was just there, and he had no problem with that. But then when he's done with work, he goes home and reads and such, but that doesn't change his interaction style. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just about interacting with people. So you're going to interact in a certain way at all times, and things like that. Unless you're drunk or high, but I
guess I just keep referencing, because I don't really think that I really think that we're working with information that isn't really in us necessarily. It's more like there's part of it's in us, but okay, so information exists, and it exists out here as extroverted information, and it exists in here as introverted information, and us creating and generating and releasing that information is the act of us using our introverted cognitive function and pushing it out into the extroverted realm. So that's kind of what I was referring to, was that since we have two extroverted functions around an introverted function, an extrovert has the ability to reach out, grab a topic, and bring it over, process it, and spit it back out in this other area, right? But an introvert has to go inside twice and create something out of nothing twice. So I think that might be why.
That's kind of why it gets exhausting.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Obviously, what's up? I don't hear you.
Talking to me?
No, Jennifer.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at the way Jung and Marie von Franz talked about introversion and extroversion, it's all about the energy going towards the object of your desire. So extroverts get energy by going after that object, which makes sense if your dominating function is an extroverted function. Whereas introverts are going to they're going to lose energy by going after that object. They don't want to do that. They want the object to come to them. And so it's an energy draining process that way. So I don't know if that helps, Topher, but I I remember reading that about how if you think about you in relation to the object, if you're extroverted, you get energized by going after the object. And if you're introverted, you lose energy by going after the object.
I mean, for the longest. Go ahead.
Okay. But I'm not like that's great and all, but I guess like it doesn't fit into my understanding of it right now. So I'm wondering if maybe he's just wrong. But that's fine.
No?
Yeah, like maybe he was wrong about the way that it works. Maybe he was like, I mean, I understand he's talking about the object, but I mean that could be taking the place of anything really. But
oh yeah, it's person, place, situation.
Yeah. But I don't think that like I don't see the trying to bring the object to you. It seems like that's kind of like that's like a gross misinterpretation of the event. But you know, he's the one who wrote it. So maybe I'll have to reread it. I have to read more of his book more carefully. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, I agree somewhat with you because I think the energy transfer thing is kind of like what confuses a lot of people. And just because I'm an ENTP and I enjoy extroverting with people like that doesn't mean that it's always energizing. I'm obviously a teacher, and the kids do drain the crap out of me. And not every day. Some days I leave class, all my classes just feeling like all pumped. But this is relative because it depends on, are they getting it? Are they behaving? Am I in a situation where I want to be? Things like that. And so that's why when people start adding in the energy, I think that gets a little pseudoscience-like, and people get all confused about that. That's why I always try to focus more on just initiating and responding. That was something that's a concrete thing, and people can understand what that means for the most part. And this is a good way for me to debunk a lot of people who think they're introverts and they're having a conversation with me, and I'm just like, well, you just initiated again. You just initiated again. You just initiated again. You just initiate. Well, I like to read books by myself. That does not matter. You just initiated again. You literally brought up a whole other point again, and so it's just like, this is initiating. And you watch the interviews, you watch, Chase typing people, and it's always like the responding people 90% of the time are going to stay on topic, until something is introduced again. And so that's just typically what happens. And then you have issues with ENFPs and ENTPs who have SI inferior, and this shoves them to think that they are INTJs or they're INFJs because it's just their fear.
Now, do you think that an introvert that were to initiate or start something new in the topic would have to zone out and not pay attention to the conversation that's going around them for a moment in order to do so?
What do you mean by zone out? Like cognitive transition?
Like, yeah, so like switch to the, like use their introverted cognitive function to create a new topic, and while doing that, they can't see the world around them during that time, or they can't hear the world around them for that time.
No, it's just exhausting to them. An ISFJ still has an ESFP shadow or an ENTP aspiration, and so I mean, majority
all the cognitive functions are always being used all the time. It's not like, oh, I'm using TI, so suddenly NE is not working.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, and so I mean, let me use myself as an example. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, every single witness has to knock on doors and talk to strangers. You can't be one without doing that. Everyone has to do it. So that includes ISFJs, and there are a huge majority of them. But a Jehovah's Witness ISFJ, for instance, like my mother, she regularly goes door to door knocking all the time, but she has her ENTP side developed very well in that sense. And so that would be the case for any introverts, but she needs her alone time. And so while this form of ministry, this form of work can be more energizing for certain types, but other types can still learn it. You know, there's let me try to think about I don't know, like a politician like Pete Buttigieg, for instance, I've typed him as an INFJ, you know, but he still has to go out there and give speeches and things like that, just like the ESTJs all do. The public demands it of him, you know, and so you have to fulfill that role. And I've also met ISFJs who were involved in sales, you know, but it might not be the best ideal thing for them to do. And so when you're dealing with anxiety, or you're dealing with this like blanket stereotypes of different people, you know, that's not a way to type. But when you see how people are consistently, then you know exactly their interaction style. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, do you drive?
Do I drive?
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, when you drive, because I have this thing where when I'm driving, like I end up where I'm supposed to be, but like I have no idea what the heck happened during that. Like I noticed the other day that I tend to like when I'm going through life, it's like I'm not really there. And I wondered if that was like a thing that's common for you too.
It can be. It just depends on how stressed out I am. Like I tell people, ENTPs don't drive with SE. We drive with anticipation, you know, and so it's just like, that's why I hold the example. I can text and drive and it's fine. I know that scares a lot of people and people think that's bad, but it's just like, I'm not really driving with my eyes. And so it's just like this, and I'm still driving. I've never been in a car accident my entire life. Been driving 20 years, and it's just. And you look at Chase, and people are like, well, "How is he recording these videos while having a whiteboard and while teaching a lecture at the same time?" Because Chase is not driving with SE. Chase is anticipating what's going to happen, and that's how we drive. And if we were trying to be like, you know,
what would it be like to drive with SE?
I don't know.
Yeah, I have a question for Topher. What happens in your head when you do zone out? Like you're in the moment, you're driving, and then all of a sudden you're not in the moment and you're in your head. What's going on in your mind at that time?
Well, I didn't even notice that I was like doing it. I didn't notice that it was something that other people aren't doing until recently. Like I think I contacted you, Matt. I was like, wait, do other people not live in multiple realities at the same time?
Yes, like, other people do not.
I think the example I gave you was like what if like there was a world where there was like do people not go off in a tangent in their head where they're thinking about like, oh, what if the world was made of people in an alternate dimension where there was like Jello people that were made out of Jello, and they like that type of thing, and how would that move around and deal with things? Like, would they still go to work in the same way? Would they still wear clothes if they were made out of Jello? I don't know. So I think like that's the tangent I went on to when I was talking to you about that. And you were like, oh, alternate realities. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see what you're talking about. I thought about those a few times.
Yeah, it happens. Like I said, it depends on, you know, what my stimulus was that day. Maybe I'm more tired than other days. I think I kind of space out more when I'm more exhausted. And then I have a hard time bringing it down. Like many of you guys watched putting my videos when I was doing it in the C.S. Joseph group was like, if I was like drinking too much coffee and I'm just like, you know, I just like start tweaking like Colin Horleo, you know, I'm just like tripping. And so you can look at the way your mind works, you know, definitely eat, blood sugar low, have you not ate, you know, whatsoever, you know, are you stressed out? Did you just get in a fight? Did you know, what's going on? And so that is all, man, that's just any hero going off and going crazy, which is fine. And
yeah, but I think that's kind of like what I'm doing, like when I'm talking to people and I'm dealing with their problems and everything, or I'm dealing with anything really. is it's like I'm just constantly creating a new universe, a new reality in my head, and then I'm like I know they're saying like, oh, you're like exploring alternate realities that already exist. No, I don't think they exist. I think like I'm creating all of these realities out of the things around me, and then I'm exploring those realities. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think it's as straightforward as people are presenting it.
Gopher,
don't
can
think
you
it's-
remind me of your type?
Huh?
Can you
Oh,
remind
what
me your
type am I?
Your what?
What type am I? What type do you think I am?
Are you into?
I think you're an intuitive hero. That's for sure.
Okay.
But since you're
I relate
questioning
to what
whether,
you're saying. That's why I'm curious.
but see, I've talked to other NI users and they kind of do the same thing, but maybe it's different. I can't see the difference between the intuition between extroverted intuition and introverted intuition in a concrete way, but NI users can do, they kind of tend to zone out in a similar way and get caught up in alternative realities or whatever. I don't know how to describe it because I'm not an
So
intuitive
the
hero
question is, can
either.
they do that while driving? Is that safe for them to do that while driving?
I don't know.
I think so. I think they do that all the time because they're also intuitive heroes.
Yes, they
if
can
you're-
do that.
I don't know. Ask our
They
our
most
resident
definitely can do
NI
that.
hero. Do we have an NI hero here?
No, there's
No,
nobody
we don't.
here.
Oh, okay.
I think Cass is. Sorry to put you on the hot seat, Cass. She lives with an INTJ.
Yes, I do. Yeah. When she was writing stories, she could drive and then be totally immersed in the world, and then completely forget that she was driving, but she would reach the destinations that she wanted to go to. So she can be in that world while just like kind of on autopilot in real life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that doesn't. That's not a good sign then.
Mm.
I'm trying to think of ways that we can differentiate between the two by asking people questions about their personal experience with that function.
See,
Yeah, I guess
find
one
that
way.
NIS. Yeah, Eugene, go ahead.
Yeah, Cass is about to talk about how to differentiate NE and NI, I'm guessing. But one way I feel like that would help you determine whether if you do have an introverted hero or an extroverted hero is if you try to tune into your parent function. Because do you think your parent function is extroverted? Is it introverted? How do you deal with people in a parental way? Because then if you can pinpoint whether that function's extroverted or introverted, it could.
We're getting off track here. We're going
No
down
worries, it's
a
okay.
road
I
that's
think
kinda
now
silly.
that you're an NI hero.
If we're
you don't think he's a starter?
if we're introverted as a hero function, but we're an extrovert, then I'm an NE hero. That's just it. This is the way it goes. Unless that whole system's screwed up, which is fine. I'm willing to accept that. But
I don't think that's
as far as
screwed up.
the
It's
system we're
just
currently using, that's that's what that
sorry.
would be, right? If that's a functional system, then
Mhm.
NE would be it. Yeah. But NI hero would be like if I was responding all the time and not interrupting you constantly, Eugene.
Well, I don't think initiating is just interrupting. I totally
Interrupt
disagree with that. Because responding types can totally interrupt you, but the point that they're trying to make would be in response to the point that you've initiated.
Oh, okay. That's a good
Does
point.
that make sense?
That's an
So
excellent
they're
point, yeah.
still kind of lingering around the energy that you've given them. As me, I initiated topic and I threw the energy at you, and now it's coming from within you, and now you're just responding to the energy that I initiated in that sense. Does that make
Okay.
sense? The way I like to visualize it concretely is like introverted types are like a box, and then extroverted types are people outside the box. So we like to put things in the box, or if we want to hear something from you, we'd like to reach something from within you. Or sometimes you might spit stuff out that we've put in there. So everything's coming from you or coming from the energy that we've initiated or thrown at you. But yeah,
I love
something
that.
like
I
that.
thought it was a very abstract way to explain.
It's awesome.
I'd like to think it's a very concrete way. I don't know, maybe I'm abstract.
It's
Just kidding.
physical. Cassandra, you want to say something?
Have I
So yeah,
been-
that's how I'd like to differentiate between initiating and responding. It's not just interrupting or just the behavior of acting like you're initiating something. It's more of the thought process. This is my daughter. Sorry. Your thought process behind it is what's important. It's not about whether they initiated the conversation or not. It's about how they're thinking about it. Is their thought process a response to your thought process? Or is he initiating a new thought process? Because consciousness is, the way Bieber described it and the way Jung described it, is about how we become oriented with what is and what could be. So it's all about
that's a
our
good point.
orientation. Yeah.
So that's a good point. So how disconnected from the current topic does an interruption have to be before it's considered to be an extroverted interruption versus an introverted interruption?
I don't think there's a difference between an extroverted interruption and an introverted interruption. It's more just a matter of how often it happens. So everyone's going to cognitively transition, whether they're aware of it or not. Everyone's going to behave differently. It's just about what's happening most often. And that's really the only way we can distinguish.
Yeah, so I feel like usually when we're typing in a group conversation like this, me initiating a lot could cause Topher to respond more because I'm initiating a lot and he has to respond to the things that I've initiated. But then he could totally initiate something when he's not around me or the other initiating or starter types in this conversation. So that's a concrete example to what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I just barely joined in. Sorry, James. What were you guys talking about?
Lots of different.
Hey Vic,
Hey, guys.
I just wanna, Cass was, before I interrupted and people started responding to what I initiated, Cass was gonna describe the difference between NE and TE since she's an NE hero and she lives with an NI user hero.
Okay.
NE and NI.
You still there? Yeah. You still there, Cass?
I have to go shower soon.
Are you informing us?
Yes.
What's your
shower.
type,
You
Cass?
must SE.
Hmm?
Only SE users shower, obviously.
Do you have to use the shower sooner than you can explain that difference, per Vic?
Okay,
That's okay.
So are we just catching Vic up on what's been going on? Or
Just like
do
the
I
last
No, we're
30
answering
seconds.
Topher.
I'm throwing the hot potato back at you, Cass.
So the current question to answer is, what's the difference between an E hero versus an I hero? I guess.
Which is a huge
Yes.
topic.
Yeah, or at least from my experience. Well, from what I have experience of NI, it seems that NI has a more symbolic and almost immersive way of experiencing abstractness. So it's as if their like visions or intuitions are real to them. It's like they enter a real abstraction, even though it's symbolic or abstract. Whereas I think NE doesn't do as similar of a thing. I think NE has it's a little bit more surface than NI seems. At least that's what it is to me. I remember talking about this before, and I can't remember what I said. But this is so far what I picked up from my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. We just had this conversation, I think, last week about we always talk about how like FE absorbs FI, and FI is the source of morality, not FE,
Yep.
and NI would be the source of abstraction, not NE, and NE
Yep.
is more or less grabbing towards it. And so, like
Exactly.
Chase
Yep.
uses biblical examples, for instance. So you would consider like God the Father as an NI user and the Holy Ghost as his NE user that would be using what's already been created to create more. And
Yep.
so when you talk about ENTPs and you're just like, oh, ENTPs or INTPs are inventors. Yes, but they are taking the wants of the masses and assimilating what everyone else wants, not necessarily what they want. You know, and so they can see the demand for Apple. They can see the demand for Windows. They can see the demand for Tesla, and then provide it for those that want it. It's not necessarily about them and their NI. It's about
Yeah.
their NE providing for others. And so that's kind of how I see that with intuition. And
Bye,
so,
Jennifer.
Yeah.
and so when you think of NI people, they're also mixed with SE, and SE are creators. And so when you have things like that, that's kind of developed SE, which makes me really actually kind of agree now with Eugene on that, talking about creating alternate realities. And I think about alternate realities, but experiencing them, not necessarily creating my own version of them, if that makes
Yes,
any
exactly.
sense.
Yes. So yeah, it's almost like I experience NISE when it's happening, when it's being described to me, when I'm actually observing it happening, I'm experiencing it and then extrapolating from it. So that's how I experience NISE as well.
Yeah, and we
So
were
it's like
talking.
you're in the alternate reality. That's what it is. Because that's how I'm experiencing it. Like I'm there, but it just seems like I
But
created it. It's not something that innately existed. It's something that I'm creating to explore. Does that make
the
sense?
creation happens from the NISE user. I think I kind of just go into it and then create more from it or extrapolate from the creation, the thing
Yeah.
that's already been created by the NISE user.
Yeah, SI
Mm.
likes to experience what the SE created for them. And so it's just all about, oh, this sensation is there and you do this for me. And the NI user is just like, okay, well, I got this vision of this house I want to get for you. You can have, and then she's like, oh, wow, he's going to do this. And I want to help him do this because then we can have kids together and such, you know, and then they have an image together of one creating it and the one supporting it. And so when you think of SINE, we are supporters, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus the creators themselves.
Can I add something from my experience?
Yeah.
Okay. So I do academic research. I think my mentor could be an NI hero. I've noticed like our relationship works very well because she always comes up with the ideas and she kind of likes to be the one sort of initiating that, and I develop them. So I don't know if that is an example of how any works with NI.
Okay. Yeah, I had a recent thing with an NI hero where well, he comes up with a thing that he wants to do, and I go like, okay, here's how you do that. And then that's kind of how our relationship goes back and forth all the time. Is it's just like, here's this thing I want to do, and I'm like, okay, but and that's great, but it looks like what you really want is this, and you do that by doing this. And he goes like, oh yeah, that's definitely what I really wanted, and that is how I would do that. Okay, that's great. So, is that helpful at all?
That's kind of how I see it working. Does that sound like any hero?
That kind of sounds like something a TE user would do too, which is another way I notice people get mistyped, is that TE can get mixed and confused with NE. So, yeah.
Thing. So yeah, so we might have to do like a nice long, like 20-minute interview with Topher or something like that, so we can really pinpoint things like that. Because you're all over the place. You're funny. Anyways, it's just like, but we were talking also about anxiety and things like that, and how that can influence a personality type, and that could be the case. And then when people are using certain medications and they get off it, that obviously is going to, and then your mind's trying to get rid of that dopamine or serotonin or whatever and things like that. And so there's a lot of different factors in there, and but it could be complicated. That's why I think if people are unsure, doing the template with multiple questions, and you have something with the transcript written out, so then we can look at the written word, you can look at the audio word, and you can look at even the physical interactions, and you have a lot of different data to come to a more of a conclusive outcome in that sense. Vic, you were going to talk about something last night. What was it? Do you remember?
No.
No? And all you guys SI Nemesis are not remembering things. Okay.
I just barely woke up.
Well, I haven't gone to sleep yet, so I'm just like here. And so, whee!
Isn't ESFP supposed to have the best memory of all of them?
Yeah, that's
All of
exactly the best
SE
out of the SE users, but not the best memory overall.
As with
If
all
it's a TE thing, maybe. If it's an extroverted thinking thing, but an experience just happens in the moment, and Vic is not yet in the moment because he just got out of bed. And SE Hero, I feel like, is not a morning person.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Well, I was going to ask a question yesterday about like FE versus TE parent for ISTJs and ISFJs. And so my sister, she would always like call every time I make like an offhanded comment or something, she'll be like, that's not appropriate to say here. And so that would be my guess of FE parent. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, but you don't want to type off that. It could be FE inferior, and so you don't want to sit there and just like, oh, well, they do this, and so that makes them this because of this one function. Now, granted, I find using functions more useful with children because I think it's more obvious, and Eugene might add on to this. I can see TE Trickster instantly with my ISFJ girls, or boys for that matter, and in the classroom, and they always have that little puzzle face like, huh? And it's just like they're trying to understand what you're saying, but they don't, and so they're trying to come, huh? And or like they do like this guess answer, which you can see in little children. But as adults get older, we kind of hopefully get over those little quirks, and that could be a case. Do you think so, Eugene?
Sorry, I kind of got distracted with my daughter and what you were saying, so I just heard part of it. But yeah, you could, on the part that you initiated about kids being easier to type when it comes to identifying their functions, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, because adults should have something, a manageable amount of cognitive functions, at least all 8 in some form or another. Whether that even be myself, who's an ENTP with SE Demon, but raised by an ESFP father who's blue collar and forced me to do work with my hands and forced me to do all this other stuff. And so granted, I was never as good as my ISTP brother, and it was very obvious, but I offered a different type of value to my dad's roofing company. And that's how it was. And so it just depends on how people grow up in that sense. And so you can have somebody who's even, it could just be FE critic for that matter, and they were raised in a household where henpecking somebody to act a certain way is totally acceptable of them. Or, they might think, well, this is the way women should be, or this is the way men should be, or human tradition, human culture will influence in them to thinking this is what I should do. I mean, I'm guilty of that with FE Child. Back when I was, and henpecking people and what they should do. Oh, I thought you were going to talk, James. It's coughing. Okay. So does that answer your question, or are you still talking about your sister?
Just ISTJs and ISFJs in general. I
Yeah.
think I had an ISTJ former coworker from a previous job like tell me one day you need to have a work ethic and be productive and stop wasting your time doing stuff. And so I'm like, is that TE parent?
In all honesty, I think that's more SI.
Yeah, SI hero or
Yeah, SI hero or SI parent can be like that too, and really, really pushing what you should do, what's traditional of a man, especially in your case, being from Venezuela, and a Latino influence, and this is the way men should be. That's still very strong in that culture.
yeah.
My parents were both farmers. They both were raised on farms, and so they obviously had a certain idea of how a man should act and what kind of job. I'm a teacher now. My parents don't even accept that as a real job.
Oh.
Okay, so because that's something a woman should do, and so it's like men should be working with their hands. Men should be strong. Men should be leaders and things like that. And it's not like they're not mean about it. It's just like I can tell they're like, oh, okay, it's not something they had an idea for their son to be doing. Which is fine because they shunned me anyways. It don't matter. So
Sorry to hear that.
I don't know. And so so you can just look at different ways people interact, and so so in all honesty, I think that's more or less when someone's trying to push a tradition on you, you need to look for SI.
Okay, that changes everything how I type people with SI because I've still never fully understood what SI was, but it's more like doing your duty and what you're supposed to do, and that's gonna vary by society and groups.
Very much so. Whether SI users, using the Quran, using the Bible, using Dianetics, using whatever, using their political party, using whatever they want to, using secularism as a new one, using new age stuff. And this is the way you should be because I have faith in this, so you should too. And so this is every SI user is guilty of that in some way or form. Just like every SI user is kind of guilty of trying to toughen people up and trying to, I don't know, get people to, man up. Is the word you use. Because you think of like SE hero as like the schoolyard bully, for instance, or using ESTPs. And I was like explaining, like even the ENTJ dealt with that. And I was just like, even though he has SE child, that sense of weakness was there. And so it's just like, come on, bro, hit you on the arm, and like, let's man up and have like Viking fights in the circle and squirm. I don't know. What do guys do?
Well, I was definitely not a schoolyard bully when I was growing up.
No, I know what you mean. But I don't know where I was going with this. I was just rambling.
Although when I saw like people like getting bullied and stuff, like I'll step in and be like, "Hey, don't do that," and it's enough to say that it didn't go well.
Yeah, that's how my dad was. He's an ESFP too, and he was in fights all the time, like defending people.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad's the same.
Your dad's ESFP as well, Eugene?
Yep, and my sister. I grew up in a house with two other ESFPs.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
We get into fistfights. The most recent one was last October.
Wow.
But oops. Yeah. Anyway, the point was that we like to jump in and defend other people, like it's an ESFP thing, and you always find yourself in trouble or something like that. Sorry, my ESFP SE hero needs attention, so you guys can ramble on.
Okay.
Probably an FI parent thing too.
Yeah, most definitely. The FI parent also can vary from person to person.
I mean, maybe for SI inferior, it's just less physical, but
Oh yeah, I mean, I never got in a fight growing up. I always found a way out with my mouth, and so I just argue my way out. And that's how I always was. And then obviously most of my friends were SPs and always wanted like to wrestle and do that whole macho manly thing. And I'm just like there, you know, and like you like have people on you throwing you around and they're expecting you to react. And I'm just like, that's not really what I do. And because I never really saw a point to it, but to an SE user that is more or less more rounding, creating something. Let's create somebody who can handle animosity. Let's create somebody who can handle life in general. Let's as in, what is the Mulan song? Let's make a man out of you or whatever. And you know, so going through boot camp, going through physical adversity, things like that is a way to they can view world as that. I don't know how we got stuck sidetracked on the SE when we were talking about ISTJs.
You were
But yeah.
comparing them to SI to SC. I think you made a comparison earlier, and then it got off to that tangent.
Yeah, and so yeah, when you discovered that, that's not necessarily FE parent. That's more or less that's an SI thing, in my opinion.
Okay.
I don't see. Could you guys see an INFJ acting like that?
Not really.
No, not really. I don't think so either. So that's what I'm getting at. Was I wouldn't see FE parent and an INFJ being that way, because the way they view the world is it's almost pragmatic in a sense, you know, because it's more like less attacking the other side of the affiliative, the NF is. And so they're like, we have this affiliative here with this interest base more or less, and you got this systematic affiliative, and I don't like because your system is hurting people.
Yeah, exactly. That's
so
the way I've. No, sorry, Matthew. Like ISFJs are like, we're gonna defend this because this is the way it's always been done, and INFJs is like, that's not the right thing to do. We got to do what's right, and it could go against the norms of the group.
Yeah, and so you look at people like Mother Teresa, who we have FE parent, you know, who did many great things, for instance, but it was in a traditional sense. You know, she was following what she learned from the Bible. She was following what she learned from the Catholic Church, and she was just implementing what was already taught. Meanwhile, you have Jesus Christ as an example coming through Israel with the sword. This is wrong, cutting across the synagogues and all this kind of stuff, and you get yourself killed. And that's just how that works. And so he was pointing out, hey, you can't have these bankers inside the temple. This system's, there's the interest isn't there. It's hurting the people. Get rid of it. Meanwhile, the ISFJ be like, well, I don't like that it's hurting people, but it's always been there. And if we get rid of it, that might make life uncomfortable. And I don't like that. While the INFJ would not care if that's important because they have SI demon. If that makes any sense. And so that's why when you say such things like that, I think of SI. I think of this enforcing in traditions. And every SI user can be guilty of that. So that's a good way to pinpoint between stereotypes of INFJ and ISFJs, because let's face it, most INFJs aren't INFJs.
I agree. I'm just so triggered with all these fake INFJs out there thinking that they're INFJs just to be that special snowflake. And even my wife doesn't like being an INFJ. I've talked to her about it and explained to her the functions, and she said she wishes she was some other type.
I think they just want to be, you know, they just want to be special. They just want to feel like there's a reason for the reason they didn't fit in.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I thought for a long time I was an INFJ until I started dating my wife, and we're like worlds apart. And I'm like, wait a minute, so what's my real type? And that's how I got into typology and dug into this rabbit hole that keeps getting deeper and bigger and more exciting at the same time. So, yeah.
That's an interesting concept to me, because like I've told everybody, it was like my first time. I didn't know nothing about this. I just like saw a random test on Facebook and took it. You know, and they're like, oh, you're an ENTP. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I started reading like everything about it. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is all making a lot of sense. You know, and then I went on YouTube and started searching through different people, and then eventually found C.S. Joseph. That's kind of how my story went. And I wonder.
That's how it went for me too.
So you always tested ESFP?
The first test I took, it said I was ESFP, and then I went to the. I was at a party, a board game party, and someone said take the test. After you take the test, watch CSJ. So I watched CSJ stuff, and I got so confused with all that EFP video with the "you're an artisan. This is TEFI NIST." And like, what the heck are these letters? So I binged through all of his playlists, and I eventually binged through all of it thrice until I had to like wait for the next video. So and then I started reading the books. That's how I got sucked into all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar story with me. I tested with it, and I kept looking at different videos online, and like I watched some of the other. I don't want to sit here and bash NFs, but a lot of their YouTube videos were all about like, well, if you feel like you're this, and everything was just like so happy and feeling and stuff like that. And I discovered CS Joseph, and it was just kind of like bam, 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 no pulling punches, and I was like, oh wow, somebody that I can actually relate with. And that's kind of how that worked out with him, and because there are a few NTs now, but I mean I still think he's a goofball, but I like him for that. That's the whole reason why I even got involved in that. And then if this didn't have any applicable sense in my own personal life, I would not be following it. But then I started using it in my day-to-day activity, and then realizing that I used it throughout my life already was kind of how I stuck around with it. But I don't know. I'd rather watch videos than read John Beebe's books. I really, really struggle with that.
I recorded an hour-long chapter on John Beebe last week, and that was quite the adventure. But I learned so much reading that chapter 10 from that John Beebe book. It's like, wow, now I know why everybody is explaining it this way, these cognitive functions. And
yeah. But I don't know. Anybody else have anything else to say?
Should we have Chase on one of our videos?
I don't know if
I won't be in that video then.
Oh yeah, sorry, Gina.
Honestly.
Okay, never mind.
I was like, wait a minute.
My
Okay.
pirate ship is sailing to the edge of the world if that happens.
Okay, no Chase.
I don't think he would join anyways. He's got other stuff to do.
We're not important enough.
We're not. We're not famous enough. Matt, get more famous.
Yeah, I already have enough problems right now. It's like 400 viewers, 400 subscribers. People sending me weird messages already.
I can only imagine that.
I couldn't imagine having 30,000 and what kind of creeps it would attract.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, but my daughter won't stop rambling, and I want to say something. Are you like taking last calls now before you end the video?
Yeah, I'm about to go to bed.
Because I took some notes about some stuff I wanted to respond to, but I couldn't because I wanted you guys to finish what you're saying. So early on in the video, you mentioned about certain types getting mistyped. And one example you had for ENTPs was, oh, they often get mistyped because people come up to you and you say you use too much TE or an ENTP, so you must not be an ENTP. And I feel like people need to remember that nurture has a huge role in this, and at the same time, a person's type isn't exclusive to just their ego. There are more these people who tend to mistype because of those things focus on the 4-function model, but there's actually 8 functions, and everyone has 8 functions. And the way for you to recognize where that function is in their psyche is to learn your cognitive attitudes, learn your archetypal roles, to learn what attitude or what kind of behavior does the hero show, what roles does the hero play, the parent, the child, the inferior, the nemesis, the critic, the trickster, and the demon. And you need to know how they interact with each other. And I think that's something our book club has helped with a lot, reading John Beebe instead of just watching secondhand videos. secondary sources from the actual primary source, which is John Beatty. It helps if you ask questions too from people who actually read the book. If you're not into reading the book, which is true for me, I have a hard time reading. I prefer videos and having people teach me those stuff. So it would be helpful if we learned about cognitive attitudes more. It would, like, someone who's an introverted intuition type parent might think they're an NI hero, or a TE child might think they're TE hero, which I see happens a lot, but they get confused with the attitude of they confuse the attitude of the hero or the attitude of a critic function with the hero or whatever. So I think it's really important to learn those stuff so that you realize that TE isn't something that ENTPs can't do, or NE or FI isn't something that INFJs can't do. So they can be moody too. They're not just always on FE because they have all 8 functions and they can manifest these behaviors, but it's a matter of the role that those behaviors play in their psyche. So I think it's important for people to know that so that they avoid mistyping people just because they see a function acting out.
And everybody
all.
can.
Well, that's why we use the interaction style instead of. So they use the typing grid, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you want to use the typing grid first, and then the cognitive function second. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah, so the
everything.
functions that we confirm.
And so, after, if there's some kind of like debate or confusion whether or not of what their temperament is, cognitive functions need to come in and concretely say this or that.
Yeah, definitely.
Uh,
You need to learn the behaviors too, specifically the ones in interaction styles and temperaments. But personally, I prefer doing cognitive functions first before that, and I just use the interaction styles and temperament to kind of verify what I observed. So I guess it's preference. What matters is that you use the whole system.
Everybody uses their trickster functions too. It's not. I don't know. I've had a hard time understanding trickster. It's like for an INFP, INTP, SE trickster. Are they blind? No. I mean, and TI trickster for us ESFPs and ENFPs. Are we stupid? No. And so forth. It's everybody uses all 8 functions. To Eugene's point, it's just. I guess it's
Yeah.
more of our preferences. I guess.
Well, as adults, and if you develop properly, yeah, and that's why it's sometimes harder to type people who are. Actually, I take that back. It can be hard to type people who are really healthy, and it can be hard to type people who are very unhealthy.
Yes.
And so hopefully most people are in the middle. So that's why that can get away with so pretty easily. But like I was talking with Eugene about with children, however, you should be able to pinpoint their trickster function pretty quickly, their child function and their heroes pretty quickly. And you can see those. And so cognitive function children is a lot easier to type that way than it is with adults. Because like she said,
We should do
upbringing.
a video on typing children and see how these cognitive functions come up with them.
I mean, I can show some videos in the group. I won't put it on YouTube because I don't want to get fired. But of some children who I think are certain types just based off cognitive function. Obviously, I can't see them interacting because they're just with me. But I'll show you like TE Trickster with an ISFJ student, for instance. It's very adorable.
Okay.
And it's just always like, you know, they're always like trying to read you. And I even get it even with the adult, like ISFJ mothers that are making the class a lot more complicated than it needs to be. And they're like trying to, their TE Trickster is just like, he's trying to talk physics but he's teaching ESL. And so it's just like, it's really weird. It's hard to explain in words, but it's interesting to watch. And I can show you what a healthy ESFP boy looks like and an unhealthy one. And so for the most part, most of my Chinese kids are all really, really good. Every once in a while I get some demons, but it's rare. And usually they're like sitting there drinking soda pop, and I'm like, you know, and it's just like, okay, can you not give him Coca-Cola before his lesson? Thank you.
And isn't that like late in the evening that you're working with them?
Yeah, it's after school for
That's
them.
such a bad idea.
They get off school usually around 4, and they start classes at 4.
Yeah, but there's the SJ Society over there, right? So
It's
they're
very
not thinking
rare.
about their future, really.
Yeah, it's very rare. I mean, most parents in China, I've noticed, don't let their kids eat that stuff. But every once in a while, you'll see. Usually, it's the kids with like the really, really rich parents. I'm assuming it's because he just does whatever he wants because they're working. I don't know. I'm not gonna get in. Yeah, where did Helen go? She did log in, and then she took off. Makes me worried. But did you have anything else to add, or otherwise I'm going to cut this off and then go to sleep?
I'm good.
Yeah, I have a question. So we've talked about how to type really healthy types and those in the middle. What about those with depression? How do we suss out their cognitive functions in order to better understand them?
In my personal opinion on that, I would have that person address the depression first before dealing with this, because this is kind of like extra, you know, and this is not, this, what is that? That's psychiatry. This is psychology, you know? And so we're talking, that's like something that's really affects people's personality type. Now with anxiety, I think you can get away with that because anxiety is a little bit more situational. But if somebody's clinically depressed and they're like that on a regular basis, and especially if they're taking SSRIs, for instance, and they're on medication, that's going to affect their personality anyways. And so not only are you dealing with the chemical imbalance, you're also dealing with medication, and you're dealing with just messed up mood and thoughts. And so if you guys would have known me when I was clinically majorly depressed, you know, and very suicidal, very different person now than I was then. And I wonder what I would have been typed at, probably as an INTJ, just due to the fact that it would have been very shadow focused. That's my opinion on that. Anybody else have anything else?
So what was the source of your suicidal thoughts? Was it just being like outcast from your family and that?
Oh no, I got outcast this last year. I was still a witness when I was depressed, which is typical of most witnesses. But no, I mean, you want to talk about my catalyst? It was just being in a high control group, essentially, if you really want to get down to it. Looking back at it now, it was an anxiety problem and things weren't working the way I thought it was going to work. NE is very optimistic with their futures and all that other nonsense. And I thought things were going to work this way and they weren't working this way. And then you realize that you had all these different ideas for the religion and how it can be used for good and all this kind of stuff. And then none of that really matters because it's all about the tradition. And so I had a lot of anxiety problems in that sense. And then, you know, anxiety came first, depression came second. And so after I fixed the anxiety with the Linden method, the depression went away with about 6 months. And then I haven't suffered with either of them in 10 years.
Well, informative statement here. When I first took the Myers-Briggs test, like the very first time, I was going through a really depressing phase in my life, and I scored ISFJ. Go figure.
Yeah, shadow, there you go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would assume that they're going to type more or less in their shadow. Yeah. But again, if they're taking Celexa and they're just like all perky and on balloons and stuff like that, that could be very misleading for all you know. Then that would be their aspiration. And a lot of depressed people also use alcohol too on a regular basis. So then you're having alcohol with Celexa with mixed moods. And so then you're like, we're even possibly talking super ego at that point. And so that I would recommend if someone was dealing with that situation to get the depression under control first with a psychiatrist, with talk therapy, with the professional. And then after that is stable, assuming that's what's going to happen, then worry about typology and things like that and more of the softer sciences on life. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
All right. Did you have any other questions?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious if Jungian depth psychology is able to be used to help to break or to replace bad habits with good ones, or to instill perhaps curiosity in children and adults to help them improve their learning habits.
Yeah, I could see
Yeah,
that.
yeah, most definitely. I can see. I think a lot of people's development, especially in certain types, depending on who their parents are, if their parents understood them better, they would respond a lot better. You see, we had the example, if you watched my video of me interviewing Helen, for instance, as an INTJ with an ESTJ father and an ESFJ mother, very SJ focused lifestyle on a triple pragmatic type. A lot of conflict there, a lot of confusion. You know, if her parents would have understood, hey, my daughter is an INTJ and this is what she likes, this is what she doesn't like, this is how to trigger her, this is how not to, you know, imagine how good the relationship would be. And then imagine how good perhaps their relationship would be as parents. And so if parents are in a healthy relationship, the children obviously have a healthier relationship. And so it's all connected. And so whenever you're dealing with the world, everything's connected. It's not just any hero talking, but everything is. And so whether or not this guy got in a fight with his wife and then he's driving his car and then he pisses off you and then this is going over here and then everything is all connected just based on one event. And so anytime you can understand people better, life is going to be better for everybody.
Yeah, I could agree with that and give some concrete examples in my classroom. It definitely helps if you understand how the kid thinks, so you could help them learn better. It's not always about doing what is traditionally done. So I noticed this about my intuitive type students. They get like they really zone out, and it's easy for a concrete typer, especially an SJ, to start getting pissed off and saying you're not paying attention, or you're I'm gonna take away the cookie from your cookie jar because you're not listening. Asked you a question and I just said the answer a few minutes ago, so why are you not paying attention? But for me as a teacher, I see I'm talking about math or I'm talking about shapes and these blocks, and I start seeing this intuitive type. He starts zoning out, and I could see in his eyes he's imagining different shapes, and it's like I don't know what it looks like in his head, but he's paying attention in his own way. It doesn't mean that he isn't learning anything. He's just constructing a new concept in the way that he's most competent in. So it really is helpful if you can understand how they think, because then if you understand how an intuitive type thinks, say my INTJ, my NI hero student, I could initiate that and I could ask him to respond to my questions and ask him to talk about what's going on in his head, because I know that he's thinking about something I said a few seconds ago, and he is actually paying attention, but he's starting to figure out the implications of what I said. So it definitely helps the learning process if you can teach in my classroom setting that everyone is involved in the discussion. So if you can teach other kids to appreciate each other's thought processes, then everyone can learn from each other too. So it's not just improving that kids learning, it's also improving the learning of the other kids, and they can appreciate each other's differences more.
Yeah, very good concrete example. Thanks, Eugene.
All right, good. So anything else?
I'm good. I gotta go, guys. You guys have fun. It's almost midnight. This little girl needs to say good
Oh
night.
wow! Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for showing up. It was actually a good turnout for both people, both days. I appreciate that. And I don't know if I'm going to continue doing two. And so we'll have to probably find some compromise in that situation. Last night we did have 15 people, and so maybe I will do two. I don't know. It just depends on my mood and things like that. But definitely, bring up ideas that you want to talk about. That'll help. Then we can have more, conclusive on subjects that we can kind of like research it throughout the week and then have a conversation on Friday or Saturday or whatever, if that makes any sense. But thanks for showing up and
Thank you,
making this
Matt.
possible. All right, stopping now.